and I just came to the conclusion I used to be good, and I probably still am. The problem is this program, and so I'm just not going to do it anymore. But everything in life that actually hinges on a moment, everything. And when you can recognize that everything in life hinges on a moment, if you can be fully present in that moment.
John, thank you for coming on today. Man, I was looking at some videos, your backstory. I'm really anxious to dive into that and all of your accomplishments, man. Congratulations on all this, being a silver medalist in the Olympics. That's absolutely incredible. But let me do a quick introduction for you, and so everybody knows exactly who you are. I've got John K Coyle, the American short track speed skater, who was part of the U.S. silver medal winning relay team at the 1994 Winter Olympics. What a feeling that must have been. John has provided on-air commentary and support to NBC as an Olympic sports television analyst for 2006, 2010, 2014 Olympic Games broadcast. He's a five-time TED speaker. He's also the author. Why he's here today, we're going to talk about design for strength, designing thinking to individual and team strengths. So, man, you've been busy.
Got around a little bit.
I guess so. Well, thank you for taking the time to come on today. I do know you do have a very busy schedule, but you've got a lot of major accomplishments in your life, and that had to take some focus. So I'm really anxious to dive into this today and how you really worked on your strengths. I was watching some of your videos over the last week, and I think it's very important that we dive into your history a little bit, how you got started, how you have you gone through the process. So you kind of give us your backstory, please, John.
Well, if you mean about athletics, is that where you'd like to go?
Yeah, yeah. Let's start with your athletics.
Sure.
Well,
So,
life and athletics that led into it.
well, the shortest version is I was probably the dumbest kid at Stanford. It's no joke. I went to high school with 67 people. So, I arrived there and I thought I was smart until the day I arrived, and then I realized I wasn't. So I did struggle quite a bit in the early days, but eventually I found my sweet spot in a major called product design. And product design is led by Stanford's still professor David Kelly. David Kelly is notable because he is the founder of IDEO, a innovation consultancy. But more importantly, David Kelly was Steve Jobs' right-hand man for 15 years, co-creating the Lisa, the Macintosh, and the iPhone, the first iteration of the iPhone. So I stumbled into having him as my mentor. David Kelly coined the term design thinking, which is a method of creative problem solving that I was able to sort of utilize from early days. And so the short version of how that applies then to my athletics is I managed to get 12th place in the world in the sport of speed skating while in California with no coach and no training program my senior year while studying full time. So I was pretty certain I would go from 12th to 6th to 1st in the 2 years I had to prepare. But that didn't happen because well-meaning coaches with poor outcomes chose for me to work on my weaknesses, which it turns out are many and varied. And I went from 12th to 34th to not even making the team 2 years later, finishing 30th in the US trials I had won 2 years prior.
What happened
But
there?
this is where design thinking sort of jumps in. The core of design thinking is always, are you solving the right problem? And I was like, why am I fixing my weaknesses? Maybe I should focus on my limited but unique strengths instead. And so I quit the team, not the sport, and I began to train on my own. And 1 year to the day of getting 30th at the US trials, were hundreds of seconds, by the way, determined first from second. I showed up to the US trials 1 year later, and in the first race back, I broke the US record by 5.5 seconds, the world record by over a second, and went on to set every single US record back to back in that meet. And, the gist of the story is we all have unique strengths, but if you don't know what they are, you don't get to put on the cape. You don't know your superpower. You don't get to put on the cape. And so we all have one. It's just a question of how do you find it?
Right. That was going to be my question is how did you find, obviously you knew you're a great sprinter, but how did you find your strength and really define your weaknesses?
So really great harbinger for knowing that you're in your area of strengths. And I'm sure you've experienced this. You probably experienced it on your show, is when time disappears and everything either happens at once, happens slowly, or happens fast, or both, and you don't know where the time went. So you'll say, where did those 3 hours go?
Yeah.
So whenever you're in your area of super strengths, when you're in the area of flow, then your perception of time gets really wonky. I recognized that there was a way of skating that for me always felt really great. And it's called doing a pivot, but it's to dive really sharply into the corners, which requires greater anaerobic strength and less aerobic strength, which just happens to be my sweet spot. And so I just started practicing diving into the corners all the time, which allowed me to go about 11% less far than everybody else that was sitting up really wide, which meant that I could go 10% less fast and still win.
Was
And
anybody
so
else doing this at the time?
so people did, no, nobody at the time. And then people started
Okay.
doing it. And now they're going so darn fast, Joe, that
Oh,
like it's not possible anymore. The ice won't
yeah.
hold you if you try to go into a corner at the speeds they're going now. Yeah, but for a little while there, it gave some sprinters like me an opportunity to compete with these generally more aerobic athletes.
Right. That's amazing. So, what is the time difference now? Now you got me curious. What is the times when you were there, and what are they running now?
So the
How much
world
faster are
record for the 500 meters, the year that I retired, or the year I said it. So I said it at 43:39, I believe, at the World Championships. Um, the world record now is 39.8. So it's
that's substantial.
3.5 seconds, or almost 4 seconds. It's shocking.
That's pretty insane. You know, especially when I was watching one of your videos and you're talking about the guy that got shipped back to, I think it was Siberia, because he came in what, 12th, and
10th.
it was the 10th, and it was just like, I think you clapped your hands twice. That was the distance between first and 10th.
Yes, the
Yeah,
gold to 10th was 33 100ths that year.
that's
That's
amazing.
that's this. 10
Yeah,
people in space.
that's. I guess when we're watching, we don't think like that. We're just watching to see who wins. But you
Right.
know, you obviously had a little more skin in the game. So now you found this strength that you had, or you really figured this out. But then what were your biggest weaknesses? Just anaerobic,
Yeah, I don't have I have no endurance. Like
right?
I don't have I have a very low something called VO2 max. So when you measure your capacity to process oxygen, mine's quite low for any kind of even regional level athlete, much less Olympic level. I once had an Olympic level athlete at my talk, and he walked up to me afterwards. He's like, "Dude, you got no business going to the Olympics with a 52 VO max. No business," which is probably true. But you learn to manage around it, and that's the whole
Yeah.
point. You design around your weaknesses. You don't try to fix them because you can't.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's what did you do with your weak? I mean, okay, you knew you had your weaknesses. You know that you weren't uh, anaerobic. You know, was it just that one strength? I mean, that was more of a strategy, right? And the strength, because you knew that you were speed, and so you had a different strategy too.
Yeah, I mean, just diving into corners meant that it required a huge burst of anaerobic power, the one thing in the world I actually am capable of. And
Right.
so I just doubled down on that, and that led to great results. That did not work very well on bad ice.
Mhm.
That requires the ice to hold you.
Right.
So I was definitely what they call a fair weather skater. Like good ice, I'm good, and bad ice, I'm bad, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Now you were an athlete for quite a few years, an elite athlete for quite a few years, and now you're in the business world. What have you taken from the business world, from being an athlete into the business world?
Great question. It's really the second topic I think we're going to touch on, which is in the world of sports, everything hinges on a moment,
Yeah.
right? And so, as the Seinfeld goes, I'm going to act it out, but I'll describe it as well. You stick your nose out a little bit, gold, back a little, silver, back a little more, bronze, back a little more, never heard of you, which
Yeah.
is cool, right? And
I've
so,
never heard that, but I'm going to use it now.
and it's true, like fourth place, nobody's ever heard of you. It's a
Right.
really tough place to finish. And what I realized, and so, tiny increments of time determine a vastly different trajectory for your career particularly post athletics. The insight I really had as I moved into business was, oh my goodness, it's true in real life too. So you asked the girl out or you didn't. You
Right.
got the exit or you didn't. You missed the car accident or you didn't. You took the promotion or you didn't. You moved across the country or you didn't. Like lots of time, just like in athletics, lead up to the moment. But everything in life that actually hinges on a moment, everything. And when you can recognize that everything in life hinges on a moment, If you can be fully present in that moment, well, then that's a life-altering, different perspective on everything. And so the third book that I'm working on now is called Counterclockwise: How to Slow the Acceleration of Time. And the entire book can be summarized in one sentence, which is that the value of an increment of time is not related to its duration. Sometimes we live more in about 3 to 5 to 10 to 12 seconds than we do in the weeks, months, or even years leading up to it.
But you have to be much like an athlete. When you get that few seconds, you've got to be ready to seize that opportunity.
100%,
And
which is
a
where all
lot of
these
people aren't.
adages come from, right? Seize the
Yeah,
moment, seize the day, carpe
yeah,
diem. Memento mori, remember you're going to die, because right now you might have an opportunity to do something significant if you recognize that you're in a moment. And sometimes we don't know. May I tell you a story?
yeah. Please.
I'll tell you the most. And so, by the way, the Greeks had, we're not very smart compared to the Greeks sometimes, I think. We have one word for time,
They tell
which
us
is
that too, though. Keep in mind, I play basketball with a couple of them.
Uh, that's funny. We have one for time, which is time. And it's the most common word in the English language, other than a, and the. And so we overuse it. The Inuit have 17 words for snow, but we still have only one word for time. Like we're trying to make it work too hard. It's not. Yeah. So the Greeks had two words for time: chronos, which is clock time, and kairos, which they use 67% of the time, was human time, the way we actually experience time, which speeds up, slows down, stops, right? Like, you can't believe that was last week. It feels like yesterday. Can't believe it was yesterday. It feels like last week. Can't believe that was last year. It feels like yesterday. Can't believe that was yesterday. It feels like last year. Or you go to a business meeting where you're sitting down with a vague acquaintance and you're trying desperately to remember what you talked about last time. And you look at your watch after what seems like 3 hours and only 20 minutes has gone by, and then your best friend comes in from out of town and you look at your watch after what seems like 20 minutes and 3 hours has gone by. Like, time is super wonky in the brain. And so the kairos definition of time is vastly more useful. It means when everything happens at once and the trajectory is reset. And this is the archer releasing the arrow, the etymology. And this is, again, avoiding the car crash, asking her out, taking the promotion. All of this stuff happens and resets your trajectory towards the future. I had one of these moments a few years ago that was really significant. It's the only reason we're even talking now. So I'm, sadly, back to the Seinfeld analogy, I became as a silver medalist, and his monologue is like, I have a problem with the silver medal. Like, oh, bronze, at least you got something. Gold, you got what you wanted. But silver is sort of like, were you late to the line? Did you not figure out where the finish line was? You lost by this much. Like, couldn't you have just stuck your nose out?
Yeah,
Um, uh, but as a silver medalist, I was a one-timer first loser. So
right,
only won Olympics, second place.
right.
But 10 years after that event, I got invited to be the analyst for NBC. So I was back to the Olympics, and everybody knew me because it wasn't that long ago since I retired, and I knew most of the skaters. But the night before the gold medal round in my sport, which is always the last night of the Olympics, by the way. So it's the night before the last night. We're at dinner with the parents of skaters because my job was to interview them and give them backstories to the commentators. One of the parents pulled me aside and literally in 15, 20 seconds changed the entire trajectory of my life. So we're at dinner and he said, I need to talk to you. He looked nervous, made me nervous. So we walk away from the table and he said, like, I just want you to hear this. We wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for you. And I said, I don't know what you mean. He said, you won't remember, but 12 years ago, after you won your silver medal, you brought it to a little reception in Bay City, Michigan. I brought my son, Alex, he was 11 at the time. He'd never skated before in his life. You put your medal around his neck, you sign an autograph. The next day, he started skating with the Bay City Speed Skating Club. And tomorrow, he's skating in the gold medal final.
Oh man, amazing.
Right. And
Yeah.
everything for me changed in that moment. I went from a one-timer first loser to realizing, oh, it actually did matter. And ultimately, the conclusion that we all need to realize is that I actually matter. Even
Yeah,
if it's one person, that's enough.
yeah,
And so I started
yeah,
talking. Now I tell this story all over the world.
yeah. Well, and it's a great story because I think a lot of us, mindset is a lot of it, and you must have just an absolutely amazing mindset to go from and from what place did you when you left college? You were
Well, it was first in U.S. trials that year, and
first,
then I
and then you
brought
went
the
to
30th.
34. Yeah, 30th. That's what I could 30th, and then back up and set a record. That's your mindset. I mean, what was your mindset? Where were you thinking, I got to do this, or were you desperate? What was your feeling inside? What made you have that
Um,
focus to do that?
I will tell you that answer in two parts. First of all, I had great parents.
Okay.
And so when I decided to quit the team, which nobody else in the world wanted me to do, not the coaches, not the other skaters, not other skaters' parents, like everybody else is coming out of the woodwork telling me, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. You'll break through. This is going to be your breakthrough year or whatever. But my parents are like, if that's what you think is right, then that's what you should do. And the other is a quote from a great German cyclist. But I think I had this and occasionally still do, which was, as he described it, self-belief beyond all reason. I just knew, like, I knew something wasn't right. I didn't have the language I have now to describe it succinctly, but I was like, that I used to be good and now I'm not. And the only thing I know is that when I trained myself, I was really good. So I'm going to do that again.
Really, yeah, that's true belief in oneself. How is there a point where you really thought, I can't, I can't do this? Was there a time that you hit that wall?
After the Olympic trials, I was ready to quit. Um, 2 years of banging my head against the wall, seeing no results, seeing reversing results, tired all the time. All my friends are making actual money, like,
Yeah,
other Stanford grads are like have real jobs and even a house or something like that. And I'm living out of a duffel bag.
sure.
um, but with the window that being willing to quit creates, you can sometimes get perspective. And so you back up. You haven't quit yet, but you're like, is this job really for me? Is this major really for me? Is this relationship for me? Like, analyze it from some different angles. And I just came to the conclusion, I used to be good and I probably still am. The problem is this program. And so I'm just not going to do it anymore. And I'm going to break away and do my own thing. And it doesn't really matter what other people think. That's what I'm going to do.
And who is in charge of that program? All ex-professional athletes? And you said, I'm gonna go do it on my own and be better.
Yes.
That takes some
And
manliness.
I'll tell you a quick story on the side of this, which is because it's going to be true for anybody listening. So after I left the team, I was the non-team player, the wild child, the rebel. I was not well, people were not fond of me after that. On either side of the program, from the coaches who were like, what does he think he can do this? And why can't
Right.
we kick him off the team? Which they probably can now, but at the time I was still a member because I had earned it the year before. And then the other group was the skaters who actually had the opposite, which is like, he's just getting to have like a good life and not be suffering here, training 14 hours a day. They didn't know what I was doing, but it's really hard on the inside. And so they're like, he's doing that and we're gonna have to do this. And so I got invited to a camp and I showed up to sort of smooth the ruffled feathers on both camps. And after the first 2 hour session, my pseudo former coach, as he became, skated over and he's like, I'm sorry, John, but this coaches and skaters have voted and you have to go home. I had driven 18 hours from Milwaukee. I had to drive 18 hours back.
Oh
So my
my
old team
God.
voted me off the island. Um, but after that, I was so motivated. I was so pissed off that I used that anger every day to get up and
Yep.
train really hard. So it was actually one of the best things that could have happened to me.
You found the motivation where you needed to find it.
That's right.
That must have, I mean, not just emotionally, that must have been a kick in the head that I can only imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I was in tears the whole way home for sure.
I'm sure. How old were you then?
23.
Yeah, you were still a kid. Um, what were you actually training? Were you, a lot of times when somebody like you breaks off and they're out to do something, did you train harder or did you refocus your training?
I refocused. They were training three times a day, and that works for an aerobic athlete.
Right.
But as a sprinter, as an anaerobic athlete, that was just too much. And so it was just destroying my muscle fibers. I was just constantly exhausted. So I switched to 2 a day, which is still a lot. And I focused also on the things I do well, which is anaerobic power, sprints, jumps. I wasn't doing any of this stuff with them. I was doing 100-mile bike rides and 16-mile runs. I was just constantly exhausted. And so I recuperated my energy in a way, and then I was able to sort of lay that into the ice on these, tighter trajectories into the corners. And voila, it totally worked out. And I will tell you, I did this in later life one time too. The only reason I'm doing what I'm doing now is because 10 years ago, as I was going through a divorce, I was like, well, I might as well quit my job too, because Lord knows,
I'm
let's just
going, I'm gonna go big, huh?
let's just burn
After
all
they kick
bridges
you
at
off the
once.
island.
And so I thought I was going to be couch surfing because I didn't have a job at first, but I was starting to speak, and
Right.
and it takes a little while to get a speaking pipeline going. And so I
Sure.
did actually, I spent 6 months at a friend's house in their basement, but
Wow.
uh, after that, it's really gained traction, and now I'm speaking all over the world. In fact, I just got off the call with both Jordan and Saudi Arabia, so I'll be speaking over there in 2 weeks, actually.
I've seen some of your speeches. They're very good. I'm in a part for real estate brokerage, and we have high turnover here.
Yeah.
And what really attracted me to your story was how you just never gave up. And we have so many young people there. And I think a lot of it, and I want to be fair, a lot of it's our training in our industry. It's just not right, for
Right.
people. But there's some companies have 90+% turnover every couple of years with new agents. And so I thought it was important to hear what somebody else has gone through, not necessarily in commercial real estate, but that grind. Sometimes you have to really find your motivation. And I found like you did it twice, say with your athletics and then wife and new job. But could you speak to the mindset that you think our younger generation needs to have getting into an industry that's getting better at support? It's evolving because younger generation is requesting it, thankfully. But the mindset that it takes to really become um, somebody like you, and or maybe not achieve everything that you did, but somebody that's going to have a very successful life.
Well, I think what I see again and again, particularly in businesses like yours, is there's kind of an archetype of what a great real estate professional looks like, but not everybody's going to fit that mold.
Right.
And so, maybe the prototype is a very extroverted, gregarious, deal-making, smooth-talking kind of person. Maybe that's the archetype. But maybe you're not that, right? Well, then with your clients, set the expectation. Listen, I'm your numbers guy, like gal. Like I'm gonna do all the math on all the real estate pricing. I'm not going to be the flashiest talker to you. I'm literally just going to feed you the information for allowed you to make the great decisions. Or the opposite. Maybe you are the unflappable, very smooth talk. You're going to say, listen, I got people doing the numbers here. I'm here to close the deal for you. And so you just set expectations of how you're going to be your best self. People are my experience is people are very tolerant of understanding that you can't be everything to everybody all the time.
Yeah.
As long as you tell them
Communicate it.
my best self.
Yeah.
And I'm going to show up as my best self. And for other things that might need not my skills, we're gonna lean on some other folks for that stuff. I'm a creative, disorganized person. If you expect me to be very detail oriented and a perfectionist, that's never going to happen. Right. But if you want insightful ideas about some new topic, I'm your person. Like, right. And the inverse, right? And so my business partner, Monica, she's a recovering lawyer. She's a detail oriented perfectionist. And so I've never read a contract. I don't even know what's in them. And so we lean on the people that have the other alternate skills and strengths. And so if you're entering this business, don't try to be all things to all people. I don't think that's going to work unless you're just a generalist, which there are a few of you. You're probably one of them, Joe, but there's a lot of people that aren't, and you can still be very successful.
But and yes, I completely agree. But when we were talking about communication there, I think a lot of younger people are afraid to go communicate
Of
to
course.
their more senior people and talk to them about it. And I think, obviously when you were saying, "Oh, I'm going to quit," how did you communicate to the coaches like this is what I'm going to go do? And how were they responsive to you? What was their take on it?
I actually used a little bit of subterfuge. I had applied to and got admitted to Kellogg.
Hmm.
And so my excuse, as it were, is, hey, I got in this amazing grad school. I need to go. I can't be in Lake Placid. I need to be proximate to Chicago. So I've found ice time in Milwaukee that they're giving to me at the Pettit Olympic Training Center. So I'm going to go train there. So that was sort of my subterfuge. I didn't just say, I don't like you and I don't agree with you. I
Right.
used a little bit of subterfuge. But I was right,
Yeah.
you know. So, there's careful ways to communicate things. And, this is this thing that, that I mentioned before. And I was in a job where my job was to be a detail-oriented perfectionist for an entire year. My job at Goldman Sachs was to help them do Y2K, make their clocks go from 12/31/99 to 01/01/00. worst job in the world for me. Literally the worst job in the world for me. But I
Yeah.
didn't know at the time that I wasn't a detail-oriented perfectionist. And so I put my heart and soul to that, and I got my reward after the end of the year, which was a PM, which stands for partially meets. So I worked 80 hours a week for an entire year to get a partially meets expectations. Like, this is about the worst thing that ever happened to me.
How about
And,
that kick in the teeth again?
right?
Yeah.
And so, but I did. I went to my boss. I'm like, I don't think this type of work is a fit for me.
Right.
Knowing full well they could just fire me right there on the spot. But at that point, I was sort of ready to be fired. I didn't care. I'm like, I think I'm more creative, innovative type. Is there something in marketing or because I was a consulting firm? And so they put me into a marketing and new business sort of stretch, actually at Enron, um, where I spent
You
four
went
years.
big. Yeah.
Uh,
Did you make any
it was
money?
a great fit for me. It was a great fit for me. And I went from, partially meets to they force ranked at this consulting firm. I was force ranked number one for the next 3 years.
Okay. I want to go back to that time thing because when you were doing something you didn't want to do, the days just
Ugh,
slow. I mean,
yeah.
I can't imagine doing an 80-hour week where it was, and we see it with our new agents here, the time goes very slow for them. But
Yes.
we tell them, listen, it's going to change and you need to prepare for it now. You need to be putting everything in place for when do get busy. It's going to come and it's going to come fast and you need to be prepared for it. And we've got a couple agents right now that started a couple years ago and they went through the training and they hated it,
Right.
long days. And it was just, oh my God, I'm so tired. I'm this. Now I hardly see them because they're loving life.
Right.
Time is flying. They go just it used to be, oh my God, the days are so long. Now it's like there's just not enough. This week went so fast, is what I hear
Yes.
from them. And it's
And
because they found it.
and so this is a chapter in the book, but the way you experience time in the present is often or even usually inversely proportional to how you remember it. So
Yeah.
this is where the phrase "the days are long, but the years are short" comes from. That's what's going to be going on in the days of training. In the early days of going, it just feels like it's tedious and mind-boggling, and it takes forever. And God, but then you'll be like, where did that whole year go? Because nothing of of real note necessarily took place. And then you finally get good, and then it's like you're scrambling to keep up with the present because you've finally got the skills to do all the things and machinate and do all the to make things successful. And then you're like, oh my God, this day is over in a flash. This week is over in
Yeah.
a flash. But you'll be like, that was the year, 2024 is the year where I closed those 18 deals in a row, bang, bang, bang. Like now you have a great memory bank. And so the way you experience time in the present is often inversely proportional to how you remember it. So if you feel like time is fast in the present, that's usually a great signal that you're doing what you should be doing.
And it's honestly, it's not that hard, not that easy to find, is it? You
No,
know,
I was
I think,
47 before I figured out I should be speaking for a living, for God's sakes.
oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really, when I do some of these, I mean, I have to look at the time to make sure I don't go over with you. And there's some people I do these interviews on, and it just, I'm like getting to an hour. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to make it. It just struggles. But then there's times I look down, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gone. I've shot through their time.
Yeah.
And you just get into that mind. You really appreciate what you're doing. And I wasn't always there when I was starting out, and then when we started a couple companies, it just seems like the days would just drag on, and now everything just seems to fly by. And now I'm having fun, and I hired fun people to be around, and it was worth it. It was worth it, but it sure takes a specific mindset to get through those first few years. It's difficult.
Yeah. I mean, I call that investment time, and everybody has to go through it. You've got
Yeah.
to go through some of the slog. I mean, you don't want to be doing that slog for 10 years. That's too long. That
Oh
means
yeah.
you're probably in the wrong business doing the wrong thing. I think there's roughly a 2-year rule. If you're not starting to see a
Yep.
trajectory change of progress emerging around 2 years out, then you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Most people will hit that curvature around a year to year and a half, depending on what they're doing. Some people get it earlier, they're super lucky. But I think almost everybody has to do some investment time to get good at anything. Everybody has to practice. Everybody has to get through the boring, tedious parts of it before they can see the results. But
You
once you
know,
get there, everything's fast.
yeah. We've had a couple agents that had success almost immediately, and then it stopped. That was worse. You know, that was because they felt, they made a couple of calls in their first few weeks, and you know, they really had this high, and then I don't know if it's mentally or maybe they weren't working as hard, but it's hard to come back from that too. It's you gotta figure out you gotta get it up and keep it
Yeah.
at a certain
You know,
level.
same in your business, same in athletics. Almost all of the best young athletes quit
Yeah.
because they're too good too early and they don't know how to fail and they don't know what that looks like to get beat. And then when they start getting beat, which is gonna happen at some point, they don't have this sort of treadmill of careful success and failure that led them to a place of confidence. They don't have it. And so they just quit. So, it's best great for the rest of us that, I probably wasn't nearly
Yeah.
as good as some of my childhood rivals, but I wasn't as good, which meant I kept doing it
Yeah.
when they were
Well,
long gone.
patience.
Yeah.
Patience is something that I think and I'm finding that with some of our younger people, that patience is something we really push them on right off the bat. It's like, listen, getting into anything in life, you need to slow it. There needs to be some patience because to get to the level like you were at, John, or a top producing commercial broker, you're going to it's going to be a push. It's going to take some time. And if you don't have patience, it's going to be
Right.
tough.
Right. And the thing that's true for sports, and I think probably your business, which isn't necessarily true for some other businesses, but I think your business can get fun.
Yeah, I agree.
Like
They can.
working in a Fortune 500. I
Yeah.
mean, I moved up pretty far. I never really got all that fun. It was still a
Yeah.
slog.
Yeah. Yeah. And brokerage, you can create your own wealth, right? I mean,
Right.
what you get put into it, you're going to get out of it. And
Yeah.
I think it's very important. But I do think, there's something in where we might be different is, you didn't focus on your weakness, you focus on your strength. In commercial real estate, if we focus on one thing, just cold calling,
Yep.
you can do that, and most people still do that. But we're finding that if you get a little more rounded with writing blogs, um, creating content and posting it out there, it can really help you build a long-term business. But um, it's kind of important. But yeah, really focusing on your strengths to get started, it's key, and the consistency is key. What's next for you, John?
Next is finishing this book, Counterclockwise, How to Slow the Acceleration of Time. It's been in the works for 10 years, but every time I feel like I'm at the
It's
end.
taken that long to work on a book for time.
Yes. Well, the problem is that the neuroscience of time perception is one of the least studied areas. So when I
Is
first
it?
started 10 years ago,
Okay.
there were 8 white papers
Oh,
on the neuroscience of time perception. Last year, there were 451. So
oh,
the knowledge is exploding. And so every time I think I'm almost done, I'm like, oh, well, there's some new information that I've
right,
got to try to incorporate. I just have to declare a finish line and say, all right, this is as complete as it's going to be. It's going to be wrong by next year, but it's as good as it's going to be right now.
right. And when do you think it'll be out?
I
2026?
I
2025?
intend to finish it by the end of the year, and then we are
Okay.
going to publish. So it's going to be out sometime probably midsummer next year.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put the link to your current book up today on the Joe Killinger website. There'll be a link to it. I'm going to put it down below. Is there anything else that you want to promote while I got you on here today?
No, just if you want more information, you want to see any of the TED Talks, you want to contact me or hire me to speak, johnkcoyle.com. That's it. It's super easy.
We'll add that down below so people can find it in that way if somebody wants to come hear you speak. I checked out a lot of videos. You do a great job, very motivational. I appreciate you taking the time today, John.
Thanks, Joe. It's a pleasure hanging out with you.
Yeah, what a story. And congratulations on all your success. It's been amazing. I want to continue to watch you find your path. But thank you for coming on. For those of you watching, if you could, please give us a like. And if you haven't done so, make sure you subscribe.